Hi everyone. So I just watched the movie Captain Fantastic, and just like the other movie I talked about, Birdman. This movie kind of sounds like a superhero movie, but it's really not. So just like Birdman, a lot of people were disappointed after watching Birdman because it has Michael Keaton in it, and it sounds like a superhero movie. So they were kind of expecting to see a superhero movie, and that's not at all what they got. Instead, they got a really deep movie that you actually have to think about a lot. And Captain Fantastic is the same. It sounds like your typical stupid superhero movie, but it's not at all. I don't know why they do this. It's an intentionally misleading title, actually, because Captain Fantastic is a fantastic movie, but it has nothing to do with superheroes. Captain Fantastic is actually, believe it or not, it's more or less my childhood in a nutshell. Even the part, because Captain Fantastic is about this guy, basically a hippie, more or less. Well, now he's more extreme than just a hippie. He's not just a hippie. But anyway, he has some pretty extreme views, and he decides that like society is evil, and he's not gonna raise his kids in society. He's going to raise them outside of society in a forest. Uh, yeah. So even that growing up in nature part was that also played a role in my childhood, but that's actually not the important aspect. The important aspect is, or at least for somebody who actually experienced a childhood like that. I guess very few people actually experienced a childhood like that, but if they have, I guess they will agree with me that um, that that having been raised in nature, that's that's really not such a bad thing. I mean, yeah, it's kind of unusual, but that's okay. I mean, that's not the aspect of my childhood that traumatized me. I mean, of course, in my childhood there was a lot of abuse going on. I was abused a lot as a child, um, but that's also, well, of course, that is traumatizing. But what really traumatized me, and that's also an important aspect of this movie, is the basically the ideological indoctrination that was forced upon me. Because just like the main character in this movie, my mother was a communist, and not just a communist, uh, but a communist party member, and not just a member of the communist party, but how would you say this? A, a rather, well, maybe not high ranking, but like an official in the Communist Party. So she wasn't just an ordinary party member. She had a certain position in the Communist Party, and her ideology and her belief, and the ideology that she forced upon me were very very similar to what you see in this movie, to what the father forces his children to believe. Because of course, and you can see that quite clearly, the father in this movie, he is also a communist, just like my mother was, and he forces his communist ideology onto his children. And of course, part of that is, and I was the same with my mother, um, that he believes like society is evil, is corrupt, is capitalist, and he doesn't want to raise his children in that evil capitalist society. And so he doesn't take them to school, and he raises them in the forest. And that also pretty much in a nutshell what my mother did. Actually, where I grew up, you have to go to school. It's not like in America where you can just say, oh, well, I'm not gonna send my children to school, I'm gonna have them homeschooled. If you do that where I grew up, you're gonna get jailed. It's illegal. But my mother still did that. You know, it's illegal not to send your children to school here, but she still did that and got away with it because well, she did kind of live off the grid, so to say. So the authorities just couldn't keep track of her, and she was also moving around a lot, so they couldn't keep track of her. And that wasn't the only illegal thing she did. She like I thought that scene was very funny. That one scene where he where he takes his children to the supermarket to steal, and teaches them to steal and steals together with them. My mother also did that. she did that with me, but she also she also committed other criminal acts, and of course she wouldn't consider them criminal acts. They would be considered criminal acts according to the law, but she didn't believe in well, in the normal law of society. She was basically anti-society, you know. So she didn't believe in those laws. So in her opinion, what she did, like for example when she stole, those were not crimes in her eye, you know. So I can actually really relate to the children in this movie, because this really is what I experienced. And as I said, living in nature was also part of my childhood, although it wasn't during my entire childhood. But it was for a couple of years, because as I said, my mother was basically always running away from the authorities because she did commit crimes. So there was a phase in my childhood where I was living in nature, where I was living completely outside of society, and was living in the forest. But it was not during my entire childhood, it was just during a couple of years. But during my entire childhood, I was raised more or less in the way that the father raises his children in this movie. So, as somebody who actually experienced a childhood like that, personally, I see this movie very different, because it does remind me of my own childhood. And I'll tell you right away, I did not have a good childhood. I mean, that should be obvious, right? I think anybody who actually experienced a childhood like that, he will not look back at his childhood fondly. It was actually very traumatizing. Of course, as I said, in my childhood there was also abuse going on, but that really wasn't the most traumatizing. The most traumatizing was really the indoctrination with communist ideology that my mother forced upon me, and that you can also see in this movie, the father doing to his children. That was the most traumatizing for me. So now when I watch this movie, of course, for me it is very difficult to watch this movie, because it reminds me of those traumatizing aspects of my own childhood. But I can see that most people will not have experienced a childhood like that for themselves. So the way most people will see this movie is different. I see it. Uh, for me, it's very difficult to watch this movie because it is traumatizing. My childhood was traumatizing, and it was like that. And if you experience that in reality, it is traumatizing. But since most people will not have experienced that in reality, will not have grown up that way, they will probably not consider this movie traumatizing. I mean, maybe you have seen the movie. Tell me, do you think it is traumatizing? Probably not. It is traumatizing to me because I actually experienced it. But I do understand that most people will not find it traumatizing, that most people will enjoy watching this movie. And it is a good movie. And I can understand that people will see it different than I see it. I can understand it. And I do appreciate this movie for the ingenious movie that it is. And of course, this movie does not pass judgment. It does not intend to pass judgment. It doesn't intend to say, oh, he is a bad guy. Well, he is a bad guy, and well, yeah, the movie does portray him as a bad guy. I mean, it's pretty obvious. A lot of people question whether or not he is a good parent, and that's what the movie intends you to do. It wants you to question what you're used to, because most people will not be used to a childhood like that. They will be used to a normal childhood. So the intention of this movie is to make you question your own normal childhood. Of course, that doesn't work with me because I'm one of the probably very few people who have actually experienced a childhood like that. So I'm not the target audience for this movie, but it is a good movie, and it does make, if you have had a normal childhood, it does make you question your normal childhood. But at the same time, it of course also questions that extreme childhood that is shown in this movie. So what this movie does is basically it shows you two extremes. It shows you the childhood the kids in this movie have, and it shows you a normal childhood. And that way you realize that what you have considered normal, that what you have considered a normal childhood, is actually not a normal childhood, but is one of the extremes. Of course, it's not saying, oh, the normal childhood is wrong, the extreme childhood that the children are brought up in this movie, that is correct. No. This is what the father does is very, very wrong, and the movie knows it. The movie just shows you what the father does as one of the two extremes, and the normal life as the other extreme. And that way you realize that what you have considered normal is not normal, but is one of the extremes. And that's where the genius in this movie lies. So yeah, the movie actually explains that itself. Actually, the movie kind of explains itself, because there is this one scene where the girl is reading Lolita. Yeah, great book to give your teenager nod. But of course, being the bad father that he is, he gives his daughter, his, I don't know, maybe 12-year-old daughter or whatever, Lolita to read. And actually my mother was like that too. You can see in this movie a lot of instances where where the father intentionally exposes his children to things that you would normally consider extremely inappropriate for children. And my mother did that too. My mother was like that too. For example, he gives his children weapons, all kinds of weapons, even at a very young age. He teaches his children to kill, and uh, and he exposes them to sexual stuff that would not be considered appropriate for children, even at a young age. And my mother was exactly like that. It sounds inconceivable, but my mother was just like that. She also intentionally exposed me to such things at a very young age. And that is also where a lot of the sexual abuse came in, because even at a very young age, she intentionally exposed me to sexual things. That is where the sexual abuse comes in my childhood. But we're not going to talk about that because sexual abuse is not part of this movie. But she also, even when I was 2 years old, she was giving me all kinds of tools and weapons that would be completely inappropriate for a 2-year-old, and she was even then, yeah, and just like in the movie, she was giving me all kinds of weapons like knives and stuff like that. I mean, we didn't have firearms, but if we would have had firearms, she probably would have given them to me as well. But she gave me all kinds of knives, even when I was just a toddler. And she intentionally did that because it was considered taboo by society to do that. So because she despised normal society, she intentionally did all kinds of things that would be considered taboo in a normal society. But let's go back to the girl reading Lolita. She explains that the genius of the novel lies in the fact that you see that it is written from the perspective of the pedophile, of a person that would be considered extremely morally wrong according to normal moral standards, but that because it is written from his perspective, you can kind of identify with him. And that was the movie explaining itself, because that movie uses the same approach. We see everything from their eyes. We don't see it from the perspective of people from normal society, but we see everything is seen basically with their eyes. They are the protagonists. The father is the protagonist. We see everything with his eyes, or with the eyes of his children, who have been indoctrinated by him. So because we see everything with their eyes, we can evaluate our normal society, our normal upbringing, we can see it in a different light. And that's what the movie is doing. Of course, it doesn't work for me because my childhood was not normal. My childhood was as abnormal as the childhood they're experiencing, so it doesn't work with me. But I do appreciate what they're trying to do, and I can see what they're trying to do, and I can see how it would work with a normal audience who have had a normal childhood. And it's very interesting movie, because it really makes you question your normal upbringing if you have had one. Of course, for me, it has the opposite effect. It makes me question my normal, it makes me question my abnormal upbringing, and makes me long for a normal upbringing. It makes me think, how nice it would have been if I had had a normal childhood, Of course, because in this movie they're also, of course, showing a normal childhood to contrast the abnormal childhood when they're visiting their relatives who live a normal life. So for me, I'm thinking, this normal life they're talking about, that sounds really interesting. I wish I would have had a childhood like that. But of course, for somebody who has had a normal upbringing, they're thinking, this upbringing in nature, that sounds really interesting. I wish I would have had a more interesting childhood. But I'm telling you, it's not a good childhood, really. I mean, living in nature is fine, but being indoctrinated by a vacuole like that, you really don't want that kind of childhood. Um, so after showing us the two extremes, you know, after showing us the one extreme, which is the father raising his children in that extreme manner, and showing us the other extreme, which is what we consider a normal upbringing. And in the end, the movie tells you what the movie thinks is right, because the movie doesn't say that the extreme education that the father forces up on his children. I mean, clearly the movie is against that. It doesn't portray that in a good light, of course, because it's not good, and the movie doesn't advocate that. If you think that's good, then you clearly have misunderstood the movie, and then you're probably as extreme as the father is. So the movie is not advocating that, but the movie isn't advocating the other extreme either, which is what we consider a normal upbringing, because the whole point of the movie is to make you realize that what you consider a normal upbringing is actually just the other extreme. So what does the movie advocate? The movie advocates what we see in the end of the movie, because during the course of the movie, the father changes, and the father kind of realizes that what he has forced upon his children was wrong, and that he basically made the same mistake that he was trying to avoid, and he basically just went to the other extreme. So after realizing that, he fixes it, and he gives his children a more moderate upbringing, which still isn't what we consider a normal upbringing, but it is actually a normal upbringing from an objective point of view, because it isn't as extreme as what we would call a normal upbringing. It doesn't involve modern technology, and it doesn't involve video games, playing video games for hours on end, and all the kind of stuff that we see when they're visiting their relatives, and but it is it's not in a forest. They're not living in a forest anymore, but they're not living in a big city either. They're living in a, I don't know, normal farmhouse or something, and then they have chickens or whatever, and but they're living I mean, they're still not technologically advanced, but they're living a more normal life. At least they're living in society. They're not living outside of society anymore. Now they're living in society, although they don't go to such extremes as we can see in modern society. I don't know, like playing computer games for 10 hours a day or whatever, and they still don't have any gadgets or anything, and they probably don't have computers, but at least they're living in society and not living outside of society anymore. So they have kind of found the middle ground between both extremes, which of course I believe is the best. It's always I think it's always the best to don't go to extremes, and the movie seems to understand that. And so and one thing a lot of people couldn't understand is at the end of the movie, the older boy, he goes to some foreign country, and a lot of people can't understand why he makes the decision to leave and go to some foreign country, because all along it was secretly his dream to be able to attend a normal school, to be able to attend a college, and it was secretly working on going to college, even though he knew that his father was totally against that. But he secretly prepared for that. He had to do it in secret. That's how much he longed for it. That he was taking all that risk of being discovered and all that, and having to do all that in secret. But that's how much he valued being able to go to college and being able to attend a normal school. But then at the end, when he had the opportunity, he doesn't do it, and instead leaves and goes to some foreign country in Africa or whatever. So a lot of people can't understand why he does that. I'll explain it to you. It's not that he really wanted to go to school. Go to school was just one way he would have been able to have contact with society. That's what he was really longing for, because he was shut off from and cut off from normal society, and he wanted to experience normal society. He wanted to be able to have normal relationships with people, something he has never had. He pretty much never had contact with any normal person, much less any kind of relationship with any kind of normal person in any kind of normal society. He didn't have that, and that's why he was longing for that. And going to school was just one way of doing that, But of course, it doesn't have to be in this form. If he goes to some other country and just lives in some other country without going to school, but as long as he is in society, from his perspective, it's the same. He just wants to have some kind of contact with society, and going to school was one way of doing that. But of course, going to that other country, as long as he lives in society, that's also what he wants. That's his goal. His goal wasn't going to school in and of itself. His goal was just to have contact with normal society, to have normal relationships with normal people. That was his goal. And actually, that was my goal for a long time, because, just like him, I have been deprived of normal relationships in my childhood. I also did not have contact with normal society because my mother did not allow that. So so of course I was also longing to have a normal life in normal society.